so much better, and the lighting's better. Crazy. Crazy world. All righty. Welcome back. Today is Wednesday. Wow, Wednesday. We're halfway through the week. So it is hump day. That's exciting. So today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about glyphosate, which is very exciting. The reason I want to talk about this is because, here we're always going to be more focused on things that are, root cause issues. Like, why are certain things happening? Why are things becoming more prevalent in today's world versus, say, 50 years ago or 100 years ago? How is that? Why is that the case? I wanted to do this because I want to keep it kind of in line with some of the posts I made today. I made a much longer post about this today on Instagram, but it is worthwhile kind of talking about because glyphosate is so prevalent at this point that it's become a major issue. And one of the biggest, I think, blind spots or kind of issues we see in the world is that we tend to segment, in this Western kind of mentality. We tend to segment things. We tend to go down these like very narrow rabbit holes, but we forget the macro. There's a macrocosm and there's a microcosm with what's going on in our world at any given time. And this is a huge issue when it comes to glyphosate because it is something that is now just in the air. In fact, 75% of the air, it's estimated in the US, has some sort of glyphosate residue in it. So when we're talking about informed consent, which has been a topic of debate, over the past few years, this is a major issue because this is not something that a lot of people say signed up for, at least willingly. Let's go with that. But let's take a step back a second so we can kind of figure out like where we're at, kind of where we're going, and what are like some of the bigger issues with this, because this is really important. And just keep this in mind that glyphosate is only one herbicide or pesticide that's used on our food supply. In truth, in reality, multiple different herbicides and pesticides are usually used in formulas. So it's usually not just one that you're getting, it's usually a combination. We've just happened to get some more information on glyphosate through some third party research. There's a lot of different, things you can check out on it. I think there's a documentary called Kiss the Ground, which is um, very worthwhile watching, I would say. So just to kind of get you caught up. But what is glyphosate? Now, again, mostly this is going to pertain to here in the US. It's a commonly used herbicide, especially in the conventional food supply. So it's most commonly actually used as a drying agent, specifically on grains. So just before grains are picked, or just before they mature, I should say, they're sprayed with glyphosate to help them essentially give up their seed and dry out faster. So it's used essentially as a drying agent. Now, glyphosate is actually it was a patented antibiotic, and this was actually done by Monsanto in 2010. And for what it's worth, it is an antibiotic. It kills things like fungi, bacteria that are responsible for breaking down nutrients in the soil and plants for plants and humans to absorb. So if it's killing off these things that break down some of our food for us and then give us different vitamins, give us different nutrients, it's going to be kind of a big issue. Now, one of the things that it does do is it blocks our ability to absorb certain essential amino acids. Now, essential amino acids, if you think of amino acids, there's roughly 20 of them we need for life. 9 of them are considered essential. And what it means by essential is that means we essentially have to get them through our food and ideally from plants. Because even if you're someone who consumes animal products, they don't create these amino acids on their own. They all originate from plants one way or another. So, kind of important to keep that in mind. So, these plants create these essential amino acids. We ingest them, but when we ingest proteins, those have to be broken down into their amino acid building blocks again before we can bring them in. One of the issues with glyphosate is that it disrupts that process. It inhibits our ability to absorb or break down these proteins so we don't get the essential amino acids we need. So, if we're not getting literally the building blocks we need for life, that's going to be a major issue. We're witnessing at the same time, a rapid degeneration of just the health in general here in the US. We're talking, if you go back only a few decades, we're talking 50 years, in the 1970s, roughly 1 in 5,000 kids have autism. Today, it's 1 in 36. That number is that rate is going up. It's going to be down. It's almost 1 in 30, depending on where you look at sources. One out of every two people is projected to get cancer at some point in their life. That's insane. This is not about getting better at diagnosis. That's almost laughable if you're talking about we've gotten better at diagnosis when we're talking about things like autism spectrum, because it is something that is apparent very, very quickly. It's not something that needs all this rigorous testing to kind of figure out. It's something that for most people it is generally very obvious. So it can't just be we're better at diagnosis and just doctors missed it for decades. That's not what happened. What's happening is, and if you actually talk to people who practice, is these are things that are becoming more common. And since the 1970s, this has been a real big issue, particularly with a huge rate in increase since the 1990s. Now, in the 1990s, interestingly enough, glyphosate was basically starting to to be used more in the conventional food supply. It was becoming more popular, more mainstream. And what you see is once you get to around 1995, 1996, you start seeing this absolute explosion, this exponential explosion of chronic diseases, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, neurologic diseases like that, or MS, autism, we were just talking about, diabetes, cancer rates. All of these are going absolutely through the roof, and to a point now that within a short amount of time, within the next 20, 30 years, if we're at a rate where it's projected that 1 in every 3 kids are going to be on the autism spectrum, literally the country is going to collapse due to economic just not being able to support ourselves economically. And we're already like on that path if we don't start doing something about it. So that's one thing. The rise in all of these epidemics coincides with the rise of glyphosate that's used in our conventional food supply. And if you go further back, if we're just going to talk about Monsanto for a second, when did they start getting into this? You have to go way back. When you're talking about the world wars, they were also responsible for things like Agent Orange. It was a lot of the petrochemical industry. And what happened is they figured out kind of during this time, they had all these leftover petrochemicals from, say, World War II, and they needed something to do with them. And some scientists figured out that, oh, hey, we can actually use some of these as fertilizers, so that farmers can forget essentially what they were learning to do, what they've learned over thousands, hundreds of generations of how to rotate crops, how to regeneratively farm. Hey, guess what? You don't have to do that anymore. We have these fertilizers so you can grow over and over again on the same space. That's leading to some major issues in the soil, which is also coinciding with the dramatic fall in the general health of the American population. So, is it a coincidence? I don't know. Now, just some more kind of numbers as we go into this and how crazy this is. Remember, this acts like an antibiotic. Anti means against, bios means life. So, literally against life. And you're talking about something that is now in the air that we breathe. Roughly 75% of our air and our drinking water. It's a water soluble toxin, so you'll find it in the drinking water. We literally have an area, 100 miles east and west of the Mississippi that is known in conventional medicine as the cancer belt. What's happening? You're getting a lot of runoff from a lot of, these farms that ends up in the Mississippi River. This water ends up in the soil. It ends up affecting a lot of these people through the air, through the water, in one way, shape, or form. You wonder why the cancer rates are so high in that area of the country. This is just simply one reason. Now, and this affects the rest of our body again in the micro and the macro sense. So, and it's not like these companies don't know about this either. And this is a big issue. So, like I said, 2010, Monsanto patented glyphosate as an antimicrobial and antibiotic. Um, the biggest issue with this is while it does that, it also affects our beneficial microbes or beneficial fungi and yeast that are in our environment. So, if and more so, by the way, than the pathogenic one, and this actually creates an acidic, toxic environment, it can actually punch holes in the gut. Now you're talking about things like leaky gut. That's going to affect your lymphatic immune system, leads to an acidic environment. Now we're going to have our detoxification pathways. They're going to be sluggish. They're going to be overburdened because now we're talking about something that is literally in our air, in our regular drinking water on a regular basis. So it's a huge issue. And this stuff, if you notice, like you don't see this stuff on the news a lot. So, for example, like you may or may not know, like in 2018, this is not long ago. This is 4 or 5 years ago. A jury actually found Monsanto, who makes Roundup, which again is the most commonly used pesticide, guilty of negligent failure for the failure to warn consumers about the dangers and carcinogenic effects of glyphosate. And they acted with malice, oppression, and fraud. Now they were actually ordered to pay out $300 million in damages, which ultimately they ended up not paying the whole part of this out of. But that is literally a drop in the bucket for these folks. It is just the cost of doing business, and they know this. Like they know this actually going into it. So if this video stays up, who knows? We'll see. With anything you say on social media nowadays, you never know what can come off, but it's ridiculous to not. So that's one major issue that we have here. And now again, like I said, there are kind of two main prongs here as far as kind of what goes on and what you can kind of do here. So let's talk about we have the human health, which is essentially the microcosm in this case, and the macro, which is the soil health, our earth. And you're noticing, like I said off the top, it's you're finding that as our health, our human health diminishes, the health of our planet is also diminishing at the same rate from pretty much the same causes. And if we keep going at it with this Western mindset of like, oh, you have this diagnosis, and for so many of these diagnoses, they'll say the cause is unknown. Why do you have high blood pressure? Unknown. What is the cause of cancer? Unknown. Like you'll see this all over and over. And it's not until you actually zoom out and get out of this model that you notice like, oh, it's actually due to the toxic acidic environments that we're putting ourselves in. How it manifests might be a little bit different from person to person, and that's where our genetic makeup comes in. But that's a drop in the bucket as far as what's going on. This isn't getting better at diagnosis. This is actually poisoning human beings on a mass scale. That's actually what's happening. And until more people either wake up about it or support folks enough to get away from this, it is going to continue to degrade us as a people together, altogether. So let's talk about how that degrades human health start. First one's cancer. Now, as I was talking about in just before 2018, so cancer was one of the main things that the jury was looking at, particularly non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, or you'll see it as NHL. Um, you know, we already know back in 2015, the International Agency for Research on Cancer actually classified glyphosate as a class 2A carcinogen, which is a probable carcinogen. You will notice if you go into Europe, the EU, glyphosate is banned. Now they generally do a better job. It's not perfect, but they generally do a better job at not letting as many toxic things into the food supply. And again, check out Kiss the Ground. You could look up Stink, which is fantastic, but more a cosmetic approach. If you look at all these industries, it's the same playbook doing the same things, but cancer is a big thing. When you have disruptions in the microbiome, when you have leaky gut, this is going to increase your chances of developing cancer. Hormone disruption, this is a huge one, particularly now if you're throwing in things like birth control on top of it too, gonna create massive issues. But glyphosate, what we know, disrupts the function of things like estrogen and testosterone. What you'll know is, or what you might want to know, is glyphosate is known as something that's a xenoestrogen. In other words, it's a foreign compound that acts like estrogen in the body. It will upregulate estrogen, usually downregulates testosterone, and it can lead to a potential range of all different health effects, including issues with reproduction in both men and women. By the way, this is not exclusive to women. Men have estrogen too. Developmental abnormalities and immune system issues. So really, really huge issues. 2018, a study by the Environmental Health Perspectives found glyphosate exposure was associated with changes in the expression of genes related to hormone signaling and estrogen metabolism. What are those changes? This is literally epigenetics. This is your genes being exposed to a poison and acting differently based on that exposure. That's essentially what's happening here. That's epigenetics. That is epigenetic control. That's what's responsible for over 95% of cancers because they're not genetic. We talked about that earlier this week. Go check out the post on that. Reproductive issues. This is a huge one too. So the Journal of Environmental Health, 2017, glyphosate exposure was associated with reduced sperm quality and altered testicular gene expression. Not great. We're seeing, if you looked into the work, or if you do, I highly suggest looking into the work of Sean Swan, who has now famously said, men are going to be sterile within 20 years. So, because of this exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals. So, it's a massive, massive issue here when it comes to this. We talked about proteins and amino acids. One of the issues because of this is glyphosate. So, this is the trick, by the way. I didn't mention this. I should have earlier. And I've mentioned this in previous posts. Is they'll say glyphosate is okay for human consumption because it does not affect mammalian cells, which technically speaking is true. Directly, I should say. It does affect it, but not directly. And the reason is because glyphosate acts on this pathway known as the shikimate pathway, which is only found in fungi, plants, and different microbes, bacteria. Problem is, we are 10 times more bacteria and fungi, and we're 10 times more viral than bacteria and fungi than we are human. So we are outnumbered, if you were to count all the cells in our body, by bacteria 10 to 1, and by viruses 100 to 1. So if you're giving something to the body that over 99% of the cells in our body are poisonous against, that's kind of going to be a little bit of a problem. Add on to that now that these fungi and mold and microbes and bacteria, viruses too, are responsible for creating and giving us the amino acids that we need from the food that we eat, and vitamins. They actually manufacture things like B12. They manufacture things like different amino acids that we need. We know that serotonin. So we need certain amino acids to create things like dopamine and serotonin. A lot of this is manufactured in the gut. Big issue. If you're throwing in literally something that is killing the life in the gut on a daily basis. We also know that neurotoxin. So we talked about off the top issues um, with autism, with increases in things like Parkinson's disease or MS. These are related to this. And then finally, last but not least, kidney liver damage. Because these things are actually toxins, we need to be able to detoxify them if they get into our system. And it's at this point, it's going to be hard to completely avoid this 100%. Like I said, it's even in the air we're breathing on a regular basis, 75% of it. We have to make sure that our bodies are detoxifying properly. And yes, while it is true, we are always detoxing to some degree, the level we're doing it is going to change depending on how well we are supporting those organs. And we are living in a time where it is more toxic than it has ever been before. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. Where this will manifest for some people could also be skin. So when I see skin issues, whether it's RA, whether it's psoriasis, eczema, acne, there is a gut component to that, whether it's antibiotics given to you by a doctor for some reason, or it's the antibiotics given to you through the steak you eat or the conventional Cheetos or whatever it is. There's going to be there's so many ways you could get exposed to this, and if we're not up to the challenge, it's going to be a slippery slope, and we're seeing the health of Americans decline because of that. So let's flip the script. So that's the micro. We're the humans, the human side of this. The micro, the macro is this planet that we happen to live on. So what does glyphosate do to that? It actually disrupts. So we have a microbiome inside of us. The soil has its own microbiome too. And wouldn't you know that glyphosate is known to disrupt that, particularly different bacteria and fungi. What it's known to do is, again, disrupt this shikimate pathway. There's certain enzymes that are responsible for creating amino acids, like again tyrosine and tryptophan and phenylalanine. Now, while this is in the soil, remember the tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine, those are the things we need to make serotonin and things like melatonin down the road, dopamine. These are some of the amino acids we need to build those. So if this is destroying it in the soil, you better believe that there's going to be less available in those plants, but also less available for our bacteria inside of us to consume too. So, it also is going to deplete the nutrient supply in these foods. A lot of these glyphosates and other pesticides, they're full of things like nitrogen and phosphorus and sulfur compounds. These are acidic elements. These are going to add to the acidic burden in the body if we do not have the alkaline buffers that we need, like calcium, like sodium and potassium, like magnesium. This is going to lead to an acidic body. And if we are in an acidic state all the time, that's going to lead to more heat. That's going to lead to more disruption. And it's going to be a real issue when it comes to our health. So, and you add on to that, if you're consuming a standard American diet that's full of, meats and dairies and eggs and, conventional grains. That's the majority of what Americans consume, all of which are acid forming in their own right. You add on to the fact that it's probably not organic. You add on to the fact that a lot of, especially the bread products, are sprayed with glyphosate. You add on to the fact that these soils are depleted of nutrients. So even if they weren't, they're not going to have the same nutrient density. You're putting yourself on a really slippery slope when you're talking about getting to a place of thriving as a human being. It's going to be very hard to do that when you're doing that multiple times a day, every day for months and years. So, got to take that context into account. The other big issue is that, again, we kind of talked about it, is it ends up in the groundwater, surface water, and then eventually the air. So glyphosate actually leaches into the groundwater, into the water on the surface, and it contaminates those resources and affects the health of those ecosystems, whether it's close to the river. We talked about the cancer belt, but also aquatic ecosystems. So a lot of different plants, a lot of different fish in the ocean. What you're starting to see is actually hermaphroditic fish, which is pretty wild if you haven't seen some of the stuff, because of this endocrine disrupting issue that glyphosate causes. So whether it's through runoff or it ends up in the waterways in a variety of ways, it's going to affect the land animals and plants, but also the aquatic animals and plants as well. So it's a real issue. So what we're having here is synthetic fertilizers that we're told. Oh, and not only that. So now that we're depleting the nutrient soil, what was promised to give us higher yields in the beginning is actually destroying our topsoil. And now getting to a point where we're getting less yields. The yields aren't as robust, and they're definitely not as nutrient dense. And they're also packed with things that are literally poisoning us. So it's time that like we have to start making a difference here with this. And it starts with voting with your dollar. Going organic isn't perfect, but it's going to be a better place to start. Even glyphosate residues can end up in organic foods. It doesn't eliminate them entirely, not because glyphosate's used on the foods, it's that it's transported through the air. It's just migrating, whether it's across the field or cross contamination. So reducing exposure, is really the number one step. We can't expect to start healing if we're constantly putting more poison into the system. The second thing we can do is start putting yourself in this position where we can start detoxifying, we can start nourishing the body and getting this stuff out. So what I do with my folks, and if you want, I could send you more information on some of these things that I do. Is we have is And a lot of this is outlined, by the way, in the 30-day transformation. So if you haven't checked that out, I would check that out because it's going to include a lot of different superfoods that are grown. And again, I want to reiterate, we're at a point where 1% of the soil here in the United States is considered nutrient dense. 1%. So it's really important to kind of figure out where your food is coming from, understanding how it's grown. Are the crops being rotated? Is it done in a regenerative fashion where the soil is able to regenerate over years and you're rotating crops properly and you're doing it using organic practices? All of these things need to be in alignment with what's going on here. And if that's not the case, it's going to lead to some real issues kind of down the road with this. So, I've been using certain products more recently that can actually help detoxify glyphosate and improve digestion. I've been using it with superfoods that will help nourish the body, improve your energy, reduce your cravings, fuel your cells. Been using different types of fruits to help improve sleep, to help reduce free radical damage, and also start decreasing, removing, getting a certain colon cleanse out. So if there are any toxins, making sure we're eliminating them. If we are, if there are parasites, and again, if there's dead tissue, if it's been a while, or there's been antibiotic exposure for, again, pretty much anyone who's exposed to glyphosate, having some sort of colon cleanse or parasite cleanse or something, even once a year, vastly helpful. But so it's in combination of cleansing this stuff out, but also replacing it with true nutrient rich foods. I mean, if you check my story that I posted today, like, I live this stuff. I consume this stuff on a regular basis, on a daily basis, especially the superfoods, because if we're not getting it, because I used to be one of those people who was like, we could probably get everything we need from just organic foods alone. But the more that I read up on it and the trajectory we're on, I think because of how toxic we're making our environment, we have to get the ball rolling with this. And this is why I started, or am starting everyone I work with, especially more recently, on this 30-day transformation, just to get the ball rolling, because it'll include all of that stuff. There is an herbal formula that will help you detox glyphosate, and there is scientific evidence to support it. There is a general, microbial blend, so we can start cleansing that stuff out and then flooding the body with the nutrients it needs, knowing it comes from high quality, organic, regenerative farms, is going to make a difference, because this is the way forward. So, that is essentially kind of how we get started. That's how we get going. Again, you could get this entire protocol. It's all laid out in the 30-day program. I could send you the link if you want. Just message me. If you have any questions on it, everything as far as how you get it, like I said, these are the protocols that I'm using now with all of my folks. And honestly, like, if we're not doing this first, it's going to be really hard to dive even deeper. It almost sets you up to heal better. So I hope this was helpful. Again, I'll put the link The link is in my bio. So wherever you're watching this, whether it's on YouTube or it's on Instagram, the link is in my bio for the 30-day transformation. And it'll include, once you sign in and get through the first page, the link to get all of these herbal formulas and get the ball rolling with it. And again, if you have any questions with this, um, you know, I'm more than happy to help you. So thank you for hanging out with me today. This is this week's talk, so I will not be here Friday. Traveling for Easter, so not going to be around. That's why we're doing it today. Thank you for hanging out with me on Wednesday. I will see you guys next week.